That's enough, Congresswoman. Senator Marco Rubio's voice cut through the hearing room, sharp and dismissive. We don't need another partisan lecture on global democracy. For the fifth time in 15 minutes, Rubio had interrupted Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Each interruption had grown more aggressive, more condescending. The packed room watched as the pattern repeated. Crockett would begin presenting evidence, and Rubio would cut her off before she could make her point. But this time, something changed. Instead of trying to continue her prepared remarks, Crockett slowly closed her binder and met Rubio's gaze directly. The room fell completely silent. "Senator," she said, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the chamber, "in my experience, when someone consistently prevents others from speaking, it's usually because they fear what might be said." She reached for a different folder, one she hadn't opened yet. "Since you've interrupted my testimony on international election standards 5 times, perhaps I should instead address your own published statements on this exact topic." The color drained from Rubio's face as she extracted a single document. His confident smirk vanished as he recognized what she was holding. "Your own words, Senator. Shall I continue?" The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The interrupter suddenly looked cornered, while the woman he'd tried to silence now controlled the exchange with nothing but composure and carefully researched facts. What followed would become a masterclass in how preparation defeats interruption, how substance overcomes theatrics, and how a freshman representative silenced one of the Senate's most vocal foreign policy experts with his own contradictory statements. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary exchange, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more moments when political grandstanding gives way to accountability and substance. Now, let's explore how Jasmine Crockett turned the tables on Marco Rubio in a way no one in that hearing room will ever forget. To understand the significance of this confrontation, we need to recognize who these two political figures are and why this particular hearing carried such importance. Senator Marco Rubio had built his political career on foreign policy expertise. The 52-year-old Florida Republican, son of Cuban immigrants, had positioned himself as the Senate's leading voice on Latin American affairs. He served as vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and was a senior member of the Foreign Relations Committee. His questioning style in hearings was well established: rapid-fire interruptions, dismissive rebuttals, and an ability to throw witnesses off balance with sudden topic changes. Rubio had perfected what political analysts called the pivot and pounce technique, interrupting witnesses before they could complete their thoughts, then immediately pivoting to a different topic to prevent them from establishing any narrative momentum. This approach had proven effective against diplomats, cabinet secretaries, and fellow legislators alike. His reputation for aggressive questioning made even seasoned officials nervous about appearing before his committees. Across the hearing room sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. At 42, the Texas representative was relatively new to Congress, but not to high-pressure situations. Before her election, Crockett had distinguished herself as a civil rights attorney handling complex voting rights cases. She had successfully argued before federal courts and had a reputation for meticulous preparation and unflappable courtroom demeanor. What made Crockett's appearance before the Senate committee unusual was its context. The joint House-Senate hearing had been convened to discuss American participation in international election monitoring missions, a topic that had gained importance following controversial elections in several allied nations. Crockett had been invited because of her unique background. Before entering politics, she had served as an election observer in 3 countries with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Rubio had arrived at the hearing with his customary confidence. His staff had prepared a thick binder of talking points focused on challenging the credibility of international monitoring organizations. His strategy, as outlined in a memo later leaked to journalists, was to use this hearing to position himself as a defender of American electoral sovereignty against foreign interference disguised as observation. Crockett, meanwhile, had prepared differently. Knowing Rubio's reputation for interruptions, she had organized her materials to allow for quick reference rather than continuous presentation. Her team had anticipated potential lines of attack and prepared concise, fact-based responses for each. Most importantly, they had thoroughly researched Rubio's own statements and positions on international election monitoring research contained in the folder she had not yet opened until this moment. The The stakes of this hearing extended beyond partisan politics. American participation in international election observation missions had long been a bipartisan effort, with observers from both parties participating. However, recent polarization had threatened this consensus. The hearing would help determine whether the United States would continue its leadership role in promoting democratic elections globally or retreat into isolation and skepticism about international standards. Have you ever witnessed someone remain perfectly calm while being repeatedly interrupted, only to turn the tables with facts their opponent never saw coming? Share your experience in the comments below about a time when patience and preparation overcame aggression or interruption. Your story might help others facing similar situations. The tension had been building from the moment Crockett began her opening statement. She had just introduced herself and established her credentials when Rubio made his first interruption. For the record, Congresswoman, he said, barely 30 seconds into her testimony, I'd like to clarify that participation as an OSCE observer doesn't necessarily constitute expertise in international election standards. Committee Chairman James Risch glanced at Rubio with slight surprise, interrupting opening statements violated normal committee protocol. But Crockett merely nodded politely. Thank you for that clarification, Senator, she responded. In addition to my OSCE experience, I've also studied comparative election law at the Hague Academy and authored 3 peer-reviewed papers on international democratic standards. Now, as I was saying, she continued outlining the history of American involvement in international election observation missions, explaining how these efforts had historically enjoyed bipartisan support. She had just begun describing specific monitoring protocols when Rubio interrupted again. Congresswoman, these protocols you're describing, aren't they essentially imposing European bureaucratic standards on diverse democratic systems? The interruption was clearly designed to force Crockett into a defensive posture, but she remained composed. Actually, Senator, these standards were developed with significant American input. The document I'm referencing was co-authored by the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute, both American organizations. She continued her presentation, but Rubio's interruptions became more frequent and more pointed. His third interruption challenged the neutrality of international observers. His fourth questioned whether American participation in such missions contradicted principles of national sovereignty. Each time, Crockett responded with specific facts, cited sources, and maintained composure. She never raised her voice or showed frustration. Instead, she would acknowledge Rubio's point, respond with precise information, and attempt to continue her presentation. The committee room dynamics began to shift subtly. Several senators were exchanging glances. Chairman Risch looked increasingly uncomfortable with the interruptions, but hesitated to intervene with a senior committee member. Junior staffers were whispering behind their hands. Journalists in the press section were leaning forward, sensing that the typical committee theater was evolving into something more consequential. Rubio's fifth interruption was his most aggressive yet. Crockett had been explaining how international standards for transparent elections actually aligned with America's best practices when he cut her off mid-sentence. Congresswoman, with all due respect, he said, his voice carrying an edge of condescension, your assertions about election monitoring standards are simply not grounded in diplomatic reality. These international organizations have repeatedly shown bias against certain types of election security measures. Aren't you simply promoting a partisan view of election administration disguised as international consensus? The interruption was clearly designed to be a knockout blow, a comprehensive challenge to Crockett's credibility, expertise, and motives all at once. Under normal circumstances, such a multifaceted accusation would leave a witness scrambling to address multiple allegations, creating a flustered response that would further undermine their position. But this was the moment when Jasmine Crockett departed from the expected script. Instead of attempting to answer Rubio's loaded question, she slowly closed her binder of prepared notes. The hearing room fell completely silent as she looked directly at Rubio and reached for a different folder, one she hadn't opened yet. Senator Rubio, she said, her voice calm, but carrying a new edge of determination. Since you seem so concerned about diplomatic reality, perhaps we should discuss your own statements to the Organization of American States last year. She opened the folder and removed a single document, holding it up for everyone to see. This is a transcript of your address to the OAS Permanent Council on the 15th of March of last year. In it, you stated, and I quote directly, "International election observation is essential to building confidence in democratic processes. The United States must continue its leadership role in developing and implementing transparent monitoring standards." Rubio's expression flickered with surprise. This was clearly not a document he had expected Crockett to possess, let alone quote from directly. Before he could respond, she continued, "You further stated that objective international monitors provide legitimacy that domestic observers alone cannot achieve, particularly in polarized political environments. Would you like to explain how your position has apparently reversed in less than 12 months?" The committee room remained silent. Rubio shuffled papers, clearly trying to recalibrate his approach. This was not the flustered, defensive witness he had expected to dominate. Instead, Crockett had come armed with his own words. "Context matters, Congresswoman," Rubio finally responded, his tone noticeably less confident. That statement was specific to the Venezuelan situation, not a blanket endorsement. Actually, Senator, Crockett interrupted the first time she had done so. "Your speech specifically mentioned that these principles apply not just in Latin America, but globally, including in established democracies. Would you like me to continue with additional quotes from your speech?" The power dynamic had suddenly dramatically shifted. Rubio, who had controlled the hearing through aggressive interruptions, now found himself on the defensive. He glanced down at his own materials, but it was clear his staff hadn't prepared him for having his own words used against him with such precision. "That's not necessary," he said, attempting to regain footing. "My point is simply that there's a difference between genuine observation and politically motivated criticism." "I completely agree, Senator," Crockett replied, her composure unbroken. "In fact, in this same speech, you stated that the difference between genuine observation and political interference lies in the consistent application of transparent, pre-established criteria. The exact criteria I was attempting to describe before your interruption." She placed the document on the table and looked directly at Rubio. "Senator, in the 15 minutes I've been attempting to testify, you've interrupted me 5 times. Each time, I've responded with factual information, including direct quotes from your own public statements. Would you prefer that I continue with my testimony, or would you like to explain to the committee why your current position contradicts your previous public advocacy?" The silence that followed Crockett's question was profound. Committee members who had been checking phones or reviewing notes were now fully engaged, watching the unexpected confrontation unfold. Chairman Risch, who had allowed Rubio's interruptions to continue unchecked, now appeared uncertain how to proceed. Rubio cleared his throat, buying time as he considered his options. The seasoned senator found himself in an unfamiliar position, caught in a contradiction of his own making, exposed by meticulous preparation he hadn't anticipated. His usual tactic of controlling hearings through interruption had been turned against him with devastating precision. "Obviously," he finally said, his voice noticeably less forceful, "my position has evolved based on recent evidence of partisan activism within some observation missions." It was a weak response, and everyone in the room knew it. Crockett simply nodded, her expression professional rather than triumphant. "I appreciate your clarification, Senator. If you have documentation of this partisan activism that caused such a significant shift in your position, I'm sure the committee would benefit from seeing it entered into the record." The brilliance of her response was immediately apparent to everyone in the hearing room. She hadn't attacked Rubio personally or celebrated her tactical victory. Instead, she had politely requested evidence she clearly suspected did not exist, while giving him an opportunity to save face by providing it. Rubio shuffled papers, clearly searching for something that wasn't there. "I'll have my staff provide that information to the committee at a later date," he said, the standard response when a politician has been asked for evidence they don't possess. "Thank you, Senator." "I look forward to reviewing it," Crockett replied, her tone remaining professional. "Now, if I may continue my testimony without further interruption." Chairman Risch, recognizing the need to restore order to his committee, quickly intervened. "The Congresswoman has the floor. Please continue, Representative Crockett. What followed was a masterclass in congressional testimony." Freed from interruptions, Crockett delivered a comprehensive, evidence-based presentation on international election standards, America's historical role in their development, and specific recommendations for future U.S. participation in monitoring missions. Her command of the subject matter was evident in every precisely worded paragraph, every statistic cited, every historical reference provided. Most notably, she did not exploit her advantage. She didn't mention Rubio again or reference their earlier exchange. She simply delivered the substantive testimony she had prepared, allowing the contrast between interruption and information to speak for itself. When she concluded her remarks, something remarkable happened. Senator Tim Kaine, normally a reserved presence in committee hearings, spoke up. "Madam Chairwoman, I just want to commend Representative Crockett for one of the most informed and substantive presentations this committee has heard this session. Despite significant distractions, she maintained focus on the policy matters at hand." Kaine's comment, a clear but diplomatically worded rebuke to Rubio's behavior, was met with nods from several committee members from both parties. As the hearing continued, Rubio's demeanor had completely transformed. The senator who had begun the session with aggressive confidence now sat quietly, taking notes and listening to other witnesses without interruption. When his turn for questions came again, his tone was noticeably more measured, his queries focused on policy specifics rather than broad accusations. Observers in the room could see the physical manifestation of his changed approach. The confident posture had been replaced by a more reflective demeanor. He made eye contact with witnesses rather than looking down at talking points while they answered. Most tellingly, he allowed responses to be completed before asking follow-up questions, a complete reversal of his earlier interruption strategy. The committee's professional staff, who had witnessed hundreds of hearings, exchanged knowing glances. They recognized what everyone in the room felt. They had just witnessed a pivotal moment where substance triumphed over political theater, where preparation overcame interruption, and where composure proved more powerful than aggression. As the hearing concluded, committee members approached Crockett to shake her hand. Even several Republican senators nodded respectfully as they passed her in the aisle. The bipartisan acknowledgement of her performance transcended the usual partisan divisions of congressional hearings. Marco Rubio, however, quickly gathered his materials and left through a side door, avoiding the press gathered outside the main entrance. His rapid departure, unusual for a senator who typically engaged eagerly with media, spoke volumes about his recognition of what had just occurred. The impact of the exchange between Rubio and Crockett extended far beyond the committee room. Within hours, clips of the confrontation had gone viral across social media platforms. The contrast was compelling. A freshman congresswoman maintaining remarkable composure despite repeated interruptions, then methodically exposing a contradiction using the senator's own words. Political commentators across the spectrum weighed in on what many were calling a defining moment in congressional oversight. What we witnessed wasn't just a clever gotcha moment, noted a veteran Capitol Hill correspondent. It was a masterclass in how preparation and composure can overcome even the most aggressive interruption tactics. Conservative analysts were notably divided in their response. Some attempted to defend Rubio, suggesting that Crockett had taken his previous statements out of context. Others, however, acknowledged the effectiveness of her approach. Whatever your politics, you have to respect the preparation. Admitted a conservative radio host, she came ready for exactly the fight Rubio brought, and she won it decisively. Progressive outlets celebrated what they saw as a symbolic victory. For years, we've watched women in congressional hearings be interrupted, talked over, and dismissed, wrote a prominent political blogger. Crockett just provided the template for how to overcome that, not through matching aggression, but through superior preparation and unshakable composure. Media analysis quickly moved beyond the political theater to examine the substance of what had occurred. International affairs experts noted that Crockett's testimony had actually contained significant policy recommendations that might otherwise have been lost in partisan bickering. Her specific proposals for strengthening American participation in election monitoring missions received serious consideration in foreign policy circles. Within days, the professional impact became evident. Crockett, previously known primarily within her district and among civil rights attorneys, was suddenly in national demand. Sunday morning talk shows requested interviews, foreign policy think tanks invited her to speak, Senior House members sought her input on international democracy initiatives. Her office reported receiving over 8,000 emails and calls in the 48 hours following the hearing, with messages coming from all 50 states and dozens of countries. Most surprisingly, nearly 30% of the supportive messages came from self-identified Republicans or conservatives who expressed appreciation for her substantive, fact-based approach. For congressional staff across Washington, the hearing became an immediate case study in witness preparation. "Everyone's talking about the Crockett method," revealed a veteran committee staffer. "Prepare not just for your own presentation, but for your questioner's previous statements and positions. Be ready to use their own words if they contradict themselves." Law schools and public policy programs requested permission to use video of the exchange in courses on government oversight, legal argumentation, and effective testimony. The Rubio-Crockett exchange, as it came to be known, was added to syllabi at institutions ranging from Harvard Law School to community college public speaking courses. For Marco Rubio, the aftermath presented significant challenges. The viral nature of the exchange, particularly the moment when he visibly struggled to explain his contradictory positions, became fodder for late-night comedians and political opponents alike. More substantively, it undermined the foreign policy authority he had carefully cultivated over years in the Senate. His immediate response reflected a recognition of political damage. Uncharacteristically, he declined media requests for 72 hours following the hearing. His office released a brief statement claiming his position on election monitoring had been consistent but nuanced language that satisfied neither supporters nor critics. When Rubio finally addressed the exchange in a Fox News interview, his approach was revealing. Rather than attacking Crockett personally or dismissing the significance of the moment, he acknowledged the effectiveness of her tactics. "Look, she came extremely well prepared. I respect that. We had a substantive disagreement about international election standards, but I could have expressed my concerns more effectively." This measured response and implicit acknowledgement that his interruption strategy had backfired suggested that Rubio understood something important had shifted. His reputation as a formidable questioner who could dominate hearings through aggressive interruption had been damaged, perhaps irreparably. The policy impact proved even more significant than the political theater. 3 weeks after the hearing, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee approved a bipartisan resolution reaffirming American commitment to international election observation mission. The resolution incorporated several of Crockett's specific recommendations, including provisions for enhancing the training of American participants in such missions. Senator Chris Coons, one of the resolution's sponsors, specifically credited Crockett's testimony. Representative Crockett's insights on standardizing observer protocols across different types of elections provided the breakthrough we needed to bring both parties together on this issue. The hearing's impact extended to committee procedures themselves. Chairman Risch, who had allowed Rubio's interruptions to continue unchallenged until Crockett's dramatic reversal, instituted new guidelines for committee questioning. Without specifically referencing the Rubio-Crockett exchange, the new rules emphasized that witnesses should be permitted to complete their responses before follow-up questions are posed. Several other committee chairs across both chambers adopted similar guidelines in the following months. Congressional veterans recognized this as a significant procedural shift, potentially altering the aggressive interruption tactics that had become increasingly common in high-profile hearings. For democracy advocates globally, the substantive outcome was even more meaningful than the procedural changes. American participation in international election observation had been declining amid partisan disagreements about standards and protocols. The renewed bipartisan commitment, sparked by Crockett's testimony, reversed this trend. Within 6 months, the State Department announced increased funding for American participation in monitoring missions, explicitly citing the emerging bipartisan consensus on the importance of international election standards as justification for the expanded program. Perhaps the most lasting legacy came in the form of a subtle but significant change in how some congressional hearings were conducted. Observers noted a measurable decrease in interruption tactics, particularly when witnesses demonstrated Crockett's level of preparation and composure. There's been a noticeable shift in questioning strategies, noted a veteran committee staff director. Members are more cautious about interrupting witnesses who clearly have command of their subject matter. No one wants to be the next viral example of having their own words used against them. For Jasmine Crockett, the experience reinforced lessons from her legal career. In a courtroom, you learn that preparation matters more than performance, she explained in a podcast interview months later. The facts, carefully presented, are always more powerful than interruptions or intimidation tactics. When asked if she had anticipated Rubio's approach, her response revealed the depth of her preparation. We studied videos of Senator Rubio's questioning style in previous hearings. We identified his pattern of interruption and prepared accordingly. But more importantly, we researched his previous statements on the exact policy issues at hand. That's not strategy, that's just good homework. The exchange between Rubio and Crockett ultimately represented something more significant than a momentary political victory. It demonstrated that in an era often dominated by sound bites and theatrical confrontation, substance and preparation still matter. It showed that composure under pressure can be more powerful than aggression. And it proved that even in the most partisan environments, facts carefully presented can occasionally transcend political division. 1 year after the hearing, both Crockett and Rubio found themselves at the same international conference on democratic institutions. Observers noted that when they encountered each other in a hallway, Rubio initiated a conversation that appeared surprisingly cordial. While no one overheard their exchange, their body language suggested mutual professional respect rather than lingering animosity. When later asked about this encounter, Crockett offered a perspective that encapsulated the broader lesson of their viral confrontation. In politics, we often confuse combat with contribution, she said. Senator Rubio and I have different views on many issues, but we're both trying to serve our country according to our best understanding of what that requires. The hearing wasn't about defeating him, it was about ensuring that facts and substance prevail over interruption and theatrics. On that day, they did. If you found this breakdown of effective communication in high-pressure situations valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more insights into pivotal political moments. What techniques have you found helpful when dealing with interruptions in professional settings? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your insights might help others navigate similar challenging conversations in their own lives.